are 39.
Mr. Issa. Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Schock. Mr. Schock votes aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 370 and the noes are 39. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. Members will please take their seats. Members will please take their seats. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with deep sorrow that I inform the House that our dear friend and colleague Don Payne has passed. He had colon cancer. In a few moments, a privileged resolution will be offered on the floor that recognizes and honors this extraordinary man who dedicated his entire life to public service, a man who made a significant difference in the lives of many in his district, in our state, in the nation, and in the world. Elected in 1988, after first serving as a Newark City Councilman and Essex County freeholder, this high school teacher, coach, turned politician went on to be the first African-American to ever serve in Congress from the state of New Jersey. Don fought tenaciously to combat the HIV/AIDS pandemic and to mitigate the loss of life and morbidity from TB and malaria on the subcontinent of Africa. He co-authored the Sudan Peace Act and worked tirelessly to end the genocide in both South Sudan and Darfur. Matter of fact, he even risked his life in Somalia, was shot at in the pursuit of peace. I know firsthand, Mr. Speaker, how much he truly cared and how hard he worked for peace and reconciliation in war-ravaged nations. I served as the ranking member of the Africa Committee when he chaired it, and he served as ranking member when I chaired it. Finally, just let me say that this man, who also served as the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and until his untimely death today, chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, he was predeceased by his wife, Hazel. Don is also the father of 3, grandfather of 4, and great-grandfather of 1. Donald Payne, Mr. Speaker, will be missed. I yield to my good friend and colleague, Mr. Pallone.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Mr. Speaker, I can't believe that Don Payne is not with us today. I'm looking over there where he would often sit, and I would come down on the floor and ask him to do a 1-minute or special order. And he always had a smile on his face. You know, he was very proud of his African-American roots, and it was one of the reasons that he would often go to Africa and champion so many causes for those in Africa. He cared so deeply about his hometown of Newark and the other towns that he represented, always looking out for those in need, the disadvantaged, the poor. Those were the people that he cared about and spent so much time trying to deal with their problems and make their life better. But I think more than anything else, I remember Don's smile. Don always felt that things could get better, that we could work together. You know, I think a lot of people don't know that his district was very diverse. There were many African Americans, but there were many people of other nationalities. We would often talk about the Italian Americans that he had lived with and grew up with and worked with in his district. And he always felt that we could have a better world, that Democrats and Republicans could work together, that people could work along ethnic, across ethnic and racial barriers. And he always made me feel, no matter how down I was on a particular day, that this place was important and that we can make a difference in people's lives. So I will sorely miss him. And I would ask this afternoon, at the end of the day, probably around 4, We have unlimited 1 minute, and we're going to have a bipartisan hour special order where members can come down and pay tribute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I do ask for a moment of silence to remember our dearly departed friend, Don Payne.
Rise. Observe a moment of silence. New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the concurrent resolution.
House Resolution 571, resolved that the House has heard with profound sorrow of the death of the Honorable Donald M. Payne, a representative from the state of New Jersey. Resolved that a committee of such members of the House as the Speaker may designate, together with such members of the Senate as may be joined, be appointed to attend the funeral. Resolved that the Sergeant-at-Arms of the House be authorized and directed to take such steps as may be necessary for carrying out the provisions of these resolutions, and that the necessary expenses in connection therewith be paid out of applicable accounts of the House. Resolved that the clerk communicate these resolutions to the Senate and transmit a copy thereof to the family of the deceased.
In order.
Resolved that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn as a further mark of respect to the memory of the deceased.
Without objection, the current resolution is agreed to, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Under Clause 5D of Rule 20, the Chair announces to the House that in the light of the passing of the gentleman from the state of New Jersey, Mr. Payne, the whole number of the House is now 433. The unfinished business is the vote on ordering the previous question on House Resolution 570, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 116, House Resolution 570, Resolution providing for consideration of the bill, H.R. 2842, to authorize all Bureau of Reclamation conduit facilities for hydropower development under federal reclamation law and for other purposes.
Question is on ordering the previous question. Members will record their vote by electronic device. It will be a 15-minute vote.
Members, now on the second and last roll call vote in the House today, a procedural vote related to the rule for debating a bill authorizing certain conduit facilities to be developed for hydropower. If this passes, we are expecting an hour of general debate and debate on amendments. Votes would be postponed until tomorrow. Members also voice voted a resolution honoring New Jersey Congressman Donald Payne. He died today from a battle with colon cancer. Congressman Payne was 77. Well, President Obama just wrapped up his first press conference of the year. It lasted about 45 minutes. He expressed his support for Israel in its dealings with Iran over development of a nuclear bomb. The president also remarked about the increase in gas prices, saying no president facing re-election would actually want to see gas prices rise because of the hardship it causes to American families. He also says he's asking Attorney General Eric Holder to examine whether speculation in the oil markets is driving up oil prices. The president also said that Democrats have a better story than Republicans to tell female voters in the November election. That's likely in relation to the recent debate over the absorption of contraception costs in the health care law. You can see the president's remarks in the C-SPAN video library. Go to cspan.org. Also, right now, we're taking your phone calls on C-SPAN 2 about the president's press briefing. While this vote is underway in the House, we'll show you a speech now by Mitt Romney. He and Newt Gingrich addressed the AIPAC conference today on the final day of their annual meeting. They appeared via satellite. Mitt Romney spoke for about 20 minutes. You can see Senator Santorum, Newt Gingrich, and Mitt Romney's speeches online in the video library if you go to cspan.org. And now Mitt Romney.
To address the AIPAC Policy Conference today. And thanks to Teddy and Ed. They've been great friends and supporters and teachers over the years. I'm sorry that my Super Tuesday travel schedule prevents me from being with you in person, But while I can't be with you, I stand with you. I share your commitment to a strong and secure Israel, and I salute your tireless work to strengthen our alliance. This year, we're gathering at a dangerous time for Israel and for America. Not since the dark days of 1967 and 1973 has the Middle East faced peril as it does today. This is a critical moment. America must not, and if I'm president, it will not fail this defining test of history. The current administration has distanced itself from Israel and visibly warmed to the Palestinian cause. It's emboldened the Palestinians. They're convinced that they can do better at the UN and better with America directly than they can at the bargaining table with Israel. As president, I'll treat our allies and friends like our friends and allies. In recent days and weeks, we've heard a lot of words from the administration. Its clear message has been to warn Israel to consider the costs of military action against Iran. I don't believe we should be issuing public warnings that create distance between the United States and Israel. Israel doesn't need public lectures about how to weigh decisions of war and peace. It needs our support. Israel's democratically elected leaders will always be welcomed and respected by my administration. Israel's current prime minister is not just a friend, he's an old friend. We worked together over 30 years ago at the Boston Consulting Group. He's a man whose intellect and courage I admire and whose family sacrifice I profoundly respect. In a Romney administration, there'll be no gap between our nations and there'll be no gap between our leaders. Now, I've seen Israel by land and by air. I've seen its narrow waist and its vulnerability to positions on the Golan Heights. I spent time with families in Sderot who've been terrorized by rocket barrages from Gaza. I've walked the streets of Jerusalem, and seen schools there that were pocked by rifle rounds that had been fired from some of the hills nearby. I would never call for a return to the indefensible 67 lines because I understand that in Israel, geography is security. I've also studied the writings and speeches of the jihadists. They argue for a one-state solution, one all-dominating radical Islamist state, that is. Their objective is not freedom, it's not prosperity, it's not a Palestinian state, it is the destruction of Israel that they seek. And negotiating and placating such jihadists will never, ever yield peace to the Middle East. I recognize in the Ayatollahs of Iran the zealot refrain of dominion. Their passion for the martyrdom of Arab youth is matched only by their cowardice in avoiding it for themselves. Nuclear ambition is pursued by Iran to dominate, to subjugate, to obliterate. A nuclear Iran is not only a problem for Israel, it's a problem for America, and it's a problem for the world. Now, we may not know when Iran will secure sufficient fissile material to threaten the entire world, but the IAEA warns that that hour is fast approaching. In the Gulf, Iran prepares to close the Strait of Hormuz to hold hostage 20% of the world's oil. In their nuclear laboratories, they prepare the means to hold hostage the entire planet. Iran has long engaged in terrorism around the world. Most recently, of course, in Georgia and Thailand and in Washington, D.C., they plotted to assassinate the Saudi ambassador by bombing a Georgetown restaurant. Iran has deployed Hezbollah and Hamas and armed the insurgents of Iraq and Afghanistan, killing our sons and daughters. They war against America. Yet the current administration has promoted a policy of engagement with Iran. The president even offered to sit down with Ahmadinejad during his first year in office without preconditions. He was silent as Iranian dissidents took to the streets of Tehran, not wanting to disrupt the potential opportunity for dialogue with Iran's tyrants. The president not only dawdled in imposing sanctions, he's opposed them. Hope is not a foreign policy. The only thing respected by thugs and tyrants is our resolve, backed by our power and our readiness to use it. Of course, the administration's naive outreach to Iran gave the Ayatollahs exactly what they wanted most. It gave them time. Whatever sanctions they may now belatedly impose, Iran has already gained 3 invaluable years. As you know, there's some in the administration who argue that Iran's leaders are rational and that we can do business with them. The President speaks of common interests. Let me be very clear about this. We do not have common interests with a terrorist regime. Their interest is in the destruction of Israel and the domination of the Middle East. It's profoundly irrational to suggest that the Ayatollahs think the way we do or share our values. They do not. I will bring the current policy of procrastination toward Iran to an end. I will not delay imposing further crippling sanctions. I will not hesitate to fully implement the ones we already have. I'll make sure Iran knows of the very real peril that awaits it if it becomes nuclear. I will engage Iran's neighbors. I will station multiple aircraft carriers and warships at Iran's door. I'll stand with the Syrian people who are being mercilessly slaughtered. I know that the fall of Assad would not only be an important victory for liberty, but also a strategic blow to Tehran. As president, I'll be ready to engage in diplomacy, but I will be just as ready to engage our military might. Israel will know that America stands at its side in all conditions and in all consequence. Of course, our strength abroad depends upon our strength here at home. My economic plans will buttress our capacity to project power, and as president, I'll repair and strengthen our military. President Obama wants to shrink our Navy, shrink our Air Force, and shrink our contingent of fighting men and women. I'm going to expand every one of them. A military in retreat invites adventurism by the world's worst actors, just as we're seeing today. A strong and superior American military is the best ally peace has ever known. And I don't seek military superiority solely for the purpose of winning wars. I seek it to prevent wars. As president, peace will be my solemn goal. A peace not based on empty assurances, but on true security and defensible borders. This will require American strength and a demonstration of our resolve. That's why, as president, my first foreign trip will not be to Cairo or Riyadh or Ankara. It will be to Jerusalem. We will make clear to the world we're going to make it very clear. We're going to make it very clear that Israel's continued existence as a Jewish state is a vital national interest of the United States. I believe the right course is what Ronald Reagan called peace through strength. There's a reason why the Iranians released the hostages on the same day and at the same hour that Reagan was sworn in. As president, I'll offer that kind of clarity, strength, and resolve. In a Romney administration, the world will know that the bond between Israel and America is unbreakable, that our opposition to a nuclear Iran is absolute. We must not allow Iran to have the bomb or the capacity to make a bomb. Our enemies should never doubt our resolve, and our allies should never doubt our commitment. It's a critical time. AIPAC has a vital voice. Together, let's achieve peace for the region and ensure a secure future for Israel and America. God bless America, and God bless our friendship with Israel. Thanks so much.
Governor, thank you. Good morning. Now let's introduce our panelists. Please welcome a longtime AIPAC activist and National Council member from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Stacy Schusterman. A Republican County Commissioner from Gainesville, Georgia, Ashley Bell. From Carmel, Indiana, AIPAC activist Doug Rose. And last but not least, a student activist from the University of Southern California, Barry Golan Blaugrund. Let's go right to our first question. Stacy Schusterman.
Clearly, Governor Romney, as you addressed, the question on everyone's mind is the danger of Iran developing nuclear arms capability. Can you discuss further your plans to stop Iran?
Thank you. Yes, a number of things. First of all, we have to put in place a diplomatic isolation program, much that was put in place against South Africa during apartheid. I would indict Ahmadinejad under the Genocide Convention. I would make sure that their diplomats are rejected and despised throughout the world. I'd also make sure that we have communicated our credible military options. We can't continue to express a point of view that sounds like we're more concerned about Israel taking action against Iran than we are about Iran becoming nuclear. And so we have to develop our own military options and communicate them to the world. We also have to coordinate what we're doing with Israel and with our friends throughout the region to make sure that this is not something that has to be done without thought and comparison and coordination. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, I'd also station 2 aircraft carrier task forces in the region, one in the Mediterranean, one in the Gulf, as well as other warships and other military capacities so that Iran can see that we're at their doorstep. And of course, we want to have crippling sanctions. Sanctions alone, however, have been ineffective so far. Of course, it took the president way too long to put in place crippling sanctions, and it was an extraordinary lost opportunity when the president failed to speak out for the dissidents. But I think we do need to communicate to the Iranian people the danger of them becoming a nuclear nation. Recognize, of course, that they need to understand that America is not going to sit by and watch Iran develop fissile material that can be used against us and against our friends in the region. We will simply not allow that to happen. Thank you.
Ashley Bell.
Good morning, Governor. Good morning,
Hi, Ashley.
A question is,
Hi, Ashley.
what is your plan to stop the Assad regime in Syria? And how can we get around Russian and Chinese intransigence at the United Nations?
Well, maybe one of the few bright spots in the Middle East developments in the last year has been the rising of the people in Syria against Assad. Obviously, as you know, Syria is Iran's only Arab ally in the region. Syria is the route that allows Iran to supply Hezbollah with weapons in Lebanon. Syria is Iran's route to the sea. So the significance of Syria perhaps distancing itself in some way from Iran is a very significant opportunity for us. And that's why we should be using every resource we have to encourage the movement within Syria to have a more representative form of government and to get rid of Assad. That includes communicating with the Alawites that there is a future for them in Syria, even if Assad is not there. It means working with Turkey and Saudi Arabia to make sure that the rebels have arms, that they're able to defend themselves and make progress against Assad. It also, I think it's essential for us to communicate that American action, military or otherwise, is not going to be determined or vetoed by China and Russia. That the United Nations has a role to play in the world, but they're not going to tell us what we do in order to protect our interests and to protect the interests of the people of Syria and to assure that Iran does not continue to have its sway in that part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck in Georgia today.
The next question comes from Doug Rose.
Good morning, Governor. What are your plans?
Hi, Doug.
Good morning. What are your plans, sir, your ideas, rather, to advance the Israeli-Palestinian peace process?
Well, that's a tough one in these conditions, of course, because you have questions about whether a unity government is going to be formed between Fatah and Hamas, and obviously if that were to occur, that has dramatic implications about the potential for discussions or negotiation. And then, of course, you have Egypt in tumult, Jordan feeling some fragility right now. You have Syria, of course, in tumult. And, I mean, talking about a peace process right now is a bit like setting up a tent in the middle of a hurricane. So there has to be some settling down of a number of questions, I think, before the peace process is going to get its legs again. And the key course in a peace process is for the parties to understand where America stands. I think one of the president's biggest mistakes with regards to peace in the Middle East was confusing the Palestinians as to where America's interests and America's commitment stood. My view is we have to communicate that we stand with Israel. There's not an inch of distance between the two of us. and that allows the Palestinians to know that we will not allow them to pursue, either at the UN or anywhere else, this one-state solution which excludes a Jewish state. My view is we have to be clear. We stand with Israel. We don't insist that Israel makes unilateral concessions. Those have not worked in the past. That's not the right way to go. We're going to have things settle down and stand by our friend.
Thank you, sir.
Our final question from Barry Golan-Blaugrund.
Good morning, Governor. Thank you for being with us. I know that you have traveled to Israel. What is something that stands out to you about the country and the people?
You know, my first trip was over a decade ago, I believe, and I went with a church group from my church and a group of friends. We went really to see the historic foundation of our faith and to see the historic sites, and you know, it's overwhelming to go to a place which has such extraordinary history. Then on my second trip, I was also struck by the extraordinary architecture and beauty. The Jerusalem stone, the fact that you have an entire city built with the same stone is just amazing. Then I came back on another trip, and the geographic characteristics of Israel struck me. Just how hilly and turned in the city of Jerusalem is upon itself. The idea of dividing a city like that seems impossible. The narrowness of the waste of Israel strikes you. But I think what strikes me most in these visits has been the passion and commitment and patriotism of the people. People are still immigrating into Israel. In Sterdot, when I met with people there and spoke with them about why they live there, I mean, most people, they think they'd all leave. People stay there. There's a sense of purpose and commitment which is striking. And by the way, I have to mention Dan Senor, a friend who wrote that book with a colleague about Startup
On this
Nation.
vote, the yeas are
232.
The nays are 177. The resolution is passed. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to remove my name as a co-sponsor of H.R. 3610 and H.R. 3611.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the bill H.R. 2842.
Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 570 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 2842. The Chair appoints the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, to preside over the Committee of the Whole. Thanks.
Committee will be in order. The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 2842, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to authorize all Bureau of Reclamation conduit facilities for hydropower development under federal reclamation law and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Napolitano, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of H.R. 2842, the Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act of 2011. It authorizes hydropower at existing Bureau of Reclamation facilities, and by doing so, it allows placement of hydropower generators on existing man-made canals and pipes that have already gone through extensive environmental review. This is a bipartisan plan to create new American jobs, cut government red tape, and expand production of clean, renewable, and low-cost hydropower. This past weekend, President Obama once again tried to claim support for an all-of-the-above energy production. But unlike President Obama's empty rhetoric, House Republicans are taking real action to prove our commitment to expanding all forms of American energy. Americans have now experienced 27 consecutive days of rising gas prices, and now the national average is pushing closer to $4 a gallon. In order to address these skyrocketing prices, Republicans will continue to pursue an all-of-the-above approach that responsibly develops the natural resources that we have right here at home. The facts are, Mr. Chairman, we have followed through on this commitment by passing through the House bipartisan reforms to break down government barriers to American energy production. Just weeks ago, the House passed a bipartisan jobs plan to vastly expand access to our oil and natural gas resources offshore and in ANWR. And today we are putting forth a plan to expand production of clean, renewable hydropower. As families and small businesses across the country are worried about rising gasoline prices, they are also worried about escalating electricity costs. Rising energy prices are a drain on our economy, pure and simple. It increases business costs and makes everything we do more expensive. Hydropower is one of the cleanest and cheapest forms of electricity. In my view, coming from the Pacific Northwest, where nearly 70% of our power comes from hydropower, hydropower is a poster child for clean, renewable energy. Unfortunately, as is too often the case, the federal government is one of the biggest obstacles to increasing the development of hydropower projects, especially small projects. This bill would remove government roadblocks and streamline the duplicative regulatory process for developing small canal and pipeline hydropower projects on existing Bureau of Reclamation facilities. This common sense plan would help generate thousands of megawatts of clean, cheap, abundant, and reliable hydroelectricity. Furthermore, it allows for our hydropower generation without a single new dam and at no cost to the federal government. Now, let there be no mistake. I am a proponent of new dams, but this bill rightly harnesses hydropower potential at existing facilities. Water users throughout the West will be empowered to develop hydropower at the federal canals they operate and maintain. It's once again important to note that this bill only allows for small hydropower projects on existing canals and pipelines. Such man-made facilities are already on what I would call disturbed ground and have already gone through extensive environmental reviews. Furthermore, this bill is a revenue generator for the federal government. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, estimates that it will generate $5 million over the next 10 years through increased hydropower production and the rental fees associated with it. H.R. 2482 affirms Republicans' commitment to a true all-of-the-above energy plan. It will create jobs in rural areas, lower energy prices, and expand production of clean, renewable American energy by simply getting the federal government out of the way. This bill received bipartisan support in the Natural Resources Committee and is endorsed by the Family Farm Alliance, the National Water Resources Association, the American Public Power the American Public Power Association, and the Association of California Water Agencies. So I want to commend the bill sponsors, Mr. Tipton from Colorado and Mr. Gosar for Arizona, for their work on this, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself 5 minutes.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do rise in support of the general premise, I repeat, the general premise of this legislation, but oppose the legislation as amended. And I'd like to mention that only 3 out of 15 Democrats support it, so while it is bipartisan, it's minor bipartisanship on this particular issue. H.R. 2842 does seek to generate additional hydropower at the existing Bureau of Reclamation facilities. That's federal properties. through developing new process of conduit and in-canal hydropower, which we should be developing at a greater speed and length. We cannot support this bill as amended, even though the original bill did also state it, and an attempt was tried to be able to take this waiver language out on page 4, lines 12 to 15. We were unsuccessful. So we cannot support it because it does have a NEPA waiver language that we cannot support. We are in support of the general intent, H.R. 2842. The federal conduits continue to fall under reclamation lease of power privilege process, the LOPP, LOP. It requires offering a preference to irrigation districts or water users association with an existing contract. Those that already have a contract, which we support. And it safeguards current project users by recognizing projects' primary authorized purposes, and that no financial and/or operational costs will be incurred by the existing water and power users. The Federal Power Marketing Administrations are also, and I repeat, are not obligated to purchase or market the power produced. Legislation does go a step too far and includes an unnecessary and unwise blanket exemption from a critical environmental law. If my colleagues on the other side had simply followed the advice of the National Hydropower Association and the Conservation Group of American Rivers, we would have a non-controversial bill that would have passed unanimously out of the House. We also received a letter from 5 environmental groups in opposition, and I ask the Chairman to grant the request to include them in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Proponents for exempting national environmental policy, the NEPA Act, will argue that government regulatory red tape is preventing the development of more hydropower. Reclamation already has the authority to comply with NEPA through categorical exemptions, and the system is working. Categorical exclusions have been issued for hydropower sites under the reclamation's LOP process at 3 specific sites in Colorado: the Lemon, which was in 1989, the Grand Valley Power Plant in 2011, Jackson Gulch in 1995. NEPA compliance for other sites, in fact, has not been the bureaucratic chaos some would make it out to be. There are 3 projects in the home state of Colorado for my colleague, the sponsor of this bill. In Jordanelle, Utah, compliance took 15 months from start to finish to receive final permit in 2004. Lake Carter, Colorado, took 6 months to finish NEPA in 2010. At Ridgeway, Colorado, an LOP was just issued last month, and after completing a 15-month NEPA process. On the South Canal, Drop 3 site in Colorado, a finding of no significant impact was just issued last month after 15 months NEPA process. Developers and irrigators need clarity and certainty so their project can be developed. Waiving NEPA will not provide that clarity and certainty. The stopback for development is not NEPA, it's lack of reclamation process. There must be a clear process in place for the development of hydropower at reclamation facilities. I urge reclamation to finalize the directives and standards as soon as possible, and it's my understanding the draft is already out to developers and irrigators for their review, and that the final directives and standards will be completed by the end of this year. It is unfortunate that this legislation contains this controversial waiver. Without the NEPA exemption, this legislation would have been on suspension, and I do oppose the legislation. Ask my colleagues to join me in opposition of this very sad portion of waiver of NEPA. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I am very pleased to yield 4 minutes to the sponsor of this very important legislation, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Washington for yielding. Mr. Chairman, members of the House on both sides of the aisle talk of the need for an all-of-the-above energy solution for this country, a solution that gives serious consideration to all resources, including renewable and alternative energy. It's easy to talk about this need, but today I offer a bill that turns that talk into action. My bill, the Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act of 2012, is a key piece of the all-of-the-above strategy energy that our country needs in order to strengthen reliable domestic energy production, expand development of responsible, renewable energy, generate economic growth, and get Americans working once more. Hydropower is the cheapest and cleanest source of electricity. This is created through modern technology. It's the highest source of non-carbon emitting energy in the world, accounting for approximately 69.9% of the United States' total renewable electricity generation, making it the lead renewable energy resource power according to the Hydropower Association. In Colorado, nearly 30.7% of our renewable energy is hydropower, but only 3.1% of all Colorado is hydropower. We have a significant opportunity in Colorado to expand on this clean, renewable source of power while creating badly needed jobs for the 3rd District of Colorado in the process. In Colorado alone, there is enough existing capacity to generate as much power as the Glen Canyon Dam. However, as it stands, no major hydroelectric facilities have been built in many years. Existing facilities are being drained by endless litigation and regulatory obstacles that stifle production and lead to increased electricity prices and shortages in many regions of the country. By streamlining the regulatory process and reducing administrative costs for small hydropower development at reclamation facilities, this common sense legislation will encourage the production of clean, renewable hydropower and provide much needed opportunities for the creation of new jobs in Colorado for some of our nation's hardest hit rural areas. This common sense bill garnered bipartisan support in the House Natural Resources Committee and has been endorsed by the Family Farm Alliance, the National Water Resources Association, the Association of California Water Agencies, and the American Public Power Association. Chris Trees, the Family Farm Alliance, and a constituent of mine of the 3rd Congressional District put it best when talking about the need for the bill, saying that, and I quote, "The margins on small hydro are very small. Districts need to be able to make timely investment decisions without the prospect of environmental reviews of undetermined length and expense. Additionally, Western districts share the nation's desire to make investments that can put people to work immediately. Environmental reviews of small hydro on existing conduits represents an unnecessary and often chilling uncertainty for the economically marginal investment," end quote. This legislation, which applies to all projects on reclamation conduits without exception, seeks to address this concern and fix an unwieldy environmental review process that requires small developers to jump through unnecessary and duplicative bureaucratic hoops in order to complete a project on existing conduits that have already undergone the proper environmental reviews. By doing this, the Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act of 2012 will jumpstart small hydropower development through which power generated will be sent directly to the grid, also creating revenues that will help pay for aging infrastructure in our communities. From the beginning, this Congress has made responsible energy development a legislative priority with the goal of putting forward a comprehensive solution.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
While putting forward a comprehensive solution that expands the development of alternative and renewable energy technologies, while continuing a development of traditional energy resources. We have an opportunity to join together in this body and pass a common sense solution to advance a common goal of developing clean and renewable alternative energy and put into place a key component of the all of the above energy plan. Ask my colleagues to take this into consideration and remember the words that are inscribed in this very chamber from Daniel Webster saying, "Let us develop the resources of our land, call forth its powers, build up its institution, promote all of its great interests, and see whether we, also in our day and generation, may not perform something worthy to be remembered." Hydropower development follows in the legacy of responsible development of our precious natural resources and with steadfast protection of our environment. I ask my colleagues for their support of the Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit and Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act of 2012. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I couldn't agree with him more. My only objection is that small portion of the NEPA waiver. I'd like to yield 5 minutes to my colleague, Ranking Member Markey, in fact, as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady very much. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this legislation. After 427 days in the majority and having no energy or job strategy to show for it, the House Republicans are now offering H.R. 2842, the Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act. We need legislation that gets hydro projects moving and gets hard hats down in the ditches again. But instead, Republicans are offering more legislation certain to be ditched by the Senate. We should encourage development of small hydropower projects at existing facilities. In fact, if the legislation simply gave the Bureau of Reclamation exclusive jurisdiction to develop hydropower at federal reclamation facilities, I would support it. If it mandated that the Bureau of Reclamation institute categorical exclusions for those small hydro projects, I would support it. But Republicans, they just couldn't help themselves. It doesn't matter the nature of the problem. For Republicans, the problem is always just nature. So they went and they gutted environmental review altogether in this bill. That's what happens when your entire economic platform is deregulation and gutting safety and environmental protections. You start waiving environmental review even when the industry you're trying to help isn't asking for it. If the Republicans had simply followed the advice of the hydro industry, we would have a non-controversial bill that I could support and recommend to all of the Democratic members that we pass it 435 to nothing out here on the House floor this afternoon. Instead, it's ideology over hydrology. That's what the Republicans bring out to the floor today. If Republicans are serious about advancing the hydro industry, here's what they can do. Extend the production tax credit. Support clean, renewable energy bonds. Support domestic clean energy manufacturing tax credits. Extend the Section 1603 Renewable Energy Grant Program. Here's what those successful Recovery Act programs have already done. 3 companies have received $67 million in tax credits to build hydro-related manufacturing facilities in the United States. 8 companies have received $2 million in grants to support hydro deployment under the 1603 Renewable Energy Grant Program. Clean, renewable energy bonds have supported $531 million in public power hydro projects across the country. But Republicans aren't interested in doing something constructive for hydro or any other clean energy technology. With their oil above all strategy, Republicans want to continue subsidizing the oil and the gas industry, $4 billion annually, $40 billion over 10 years, but shut down all the clean energy programs that I just outlined. They're going directly after any and all threats to big oil and big coal, and they're targeting clean energy jobs for elimination. Republicans in our committee have reported out a bill that would repeal borrowing authority that the Western Area Power Administration currently has to help finance transmission serving renewable energy projects. Between one project in Montana that is already under construction and 3 others that are deep into development, there are 11,500 jobs at stake, but the Republicans don't care about those 11,500 jobs. And then there's the wind industry. 10,000 American workers have already been cut in the wind industry because the production tax credit is expiring at the end of the year and orders are drying up. 27,000 more wind workers will lose their jobs if the Republicans get their way and raise taxes on the wind industry beginning on December 31st of this year. A clean energy wave is upon us. America needs a vibrant domestic hydro industry, along with a healthy wind and solar and geothermal and biomass industry, if we have to capture its benefits. Otherwise, this wave will crash down upon us and instead carry the Chinese, the Indian, and the German economies to prosperity in this very sector. Let us vote down this bad bill before us and move on to the real policies that will help America's hydro sector. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to yield 5 minutes to the chairman of the subcommittee that dealt with this legislation, the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I would say to the gentleman from Massachusetts that nothing in this measure has anything at all to do with oil production. Quite the contrary, this bill reduces our reliance on fossil fuels by bringing hundreds of thousands of megawatts of new, clean hydroelectricity to the grid. I don't understand the objection to this bill. This measure by Mr. Tipton does everything the environmentalist left says that it likes. It produces absolutely clean, renewable electricity in vast quantities at precisely no cost to taxpayers on projects that have already undergone environmental review, simply by installing small generators in existing pipelines and canals where there are no fish or flora or fowl of any kind. That is the alpha and omega of Mr. Tipton's bill. Authorize these simple projects on existing Bureau of Reclamation facilities. That's it. There are untold thousands of miles of pipelines and canals and aqueducts attached to these facilities that convey water by simple gravity. There's water in these existing facilities that is utterly devoid of any life whatsoever. There's no conceivable environmental impact whatsoever. These existing pipelines, if equipped with simple hydroelectric generators, could generate electricity that would take several major multi-billion-dollar hydroelectric dams across the West to produce. In fact, our committee took testimony that in Colorado alone, the hydroelectric facilities, small generators that would be encouraged by this bill, could produce as much power as is currently produced by the entire Glen Canyon Dam. Now, multiply that throughout the United States, and you begin to realize what a huge impact this could have on new, clean, affordable energy for America. Those hydroelectric generators are not going into these pipelines right now for one simple and utterly absurd reason. Government regulations make it economically impossible to do so. Our subcommittee took testimony from farmers and water districts who are trying to install these generators, but instead of doing everything it can to assist them, this administration instead smothers them with endless regulatory delays, demands for wildly expensive environmental studies, and exorbitant permitting fees. According to testimony before the committee that the gentleman from Colorado cited, the net effect of these environmental regulations can more than double the cost of these projects, simply pricing them out of reach. In one case, a witness told us that a $20,000 small generator project, $20,000, would have required $50,000 in permitting costs, and so it doesn't move forward. Congressman Tipton's bill instead welcomes these small hydroelectric generators by authorizing their placement in existing Bureau of Reclamation conduits. It invites existing operators and users to invest in these generators at no public cost. It establishes an office within the Bureau of Reclamation with the responsibility to assist projects, and it exempts them from paying for another costly, time-consuming, and pointless NEPA study when there's no conceivable environmental impact involved. These facilities have already undergone the environmental process when they were built, when they were upgraded, or when their repayment contracts were renewed. It is simply a waste of time and money to put them through yet another review before these small generators can be installed. I mean, think about the implications just to farming alone. Some irrigation districts are forced to use diesel generators to pump water to the fields. Put hydroelectric generators in existing canals and pipelines, and they become virtually self-sustaining while reducing reliance on other sources of electricity that produce air emissions. In addition, sales of canal-based electricity could be used for irrigators, which would help upgrade existing facilities and infrastructure, create jobs, and relieve exhausted federal taxpayers of these costs. And the construction of these generators would mean new, high-paying jobs for Americans. It is truly mystifying that a nature plagued by prolonged economic stagnation, chronic unemployment, and increasingly scarce and expensive electricity would adopt a willful and deliberate policy of obstructing the construction of these inexpensive and innocuous generators in already existing facilities. Mr. Chairman, there are fewer Americans working today than on the day that Barack Obama took office more than 3 long years ago. During that period, he has taken well over $1 trillion from the earnings of hard-working American families to funnel to well-connected companies claiming to create jobs. In the case of Solyndra, it penciled out to $450,000 per job, jobs that disappeared as soon as the government money ran out. Yet here, with this measure, at no cost to these hard-working families, we can provide...
I yield one additional minute.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
I thank the gentleman. As I said, at no cost to these hardworking families, at no cost to the environment, simply by getting absurdly expensive and utterly duplicative government regulations out of the way, we could add tens of thousands of megawatts of clean and cheap electricity to our domestic energy supply, produce permanent jobs, reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and lower the utility bills of American families. Our nation desperately needs clean, affordable, and abundant electricity, and it desperately needs permanent jobs. But to get them, it most of all desperately needs common sense restored to its government. The progress that the American people have made in doing that, as well as the unfinished business remaining before them, will be very precisely measured by the roll call on this bill. Now, yield back.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, what time frame do we have on both
Gentlewoman, Gentlewoman has 20.5 minutes, and the gentleman from Washington has 14 minutes.
I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to yield 5 minutes to a co-sponsor of this legislation and a very valuable member of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Gosar.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hastings. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the bill Congressman Tipton and I have worked closely on, H.R. 2842, the Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act of 2012. Arizona has been hit hard by the recent recession. The rural counties that I represent are faced with unemployment rates that far exceed the national average. This bill could provide a little of the much-needed relief for these communities. The Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act of 2012 is common sense legislation that will create jobs in rural Arizona, increase our country's renewable energy portfolio, and generate revenues for the federal treasury by cutting duplicative bureaucratic red tape. Specifically, it would allow Arizonans that operate existing irrigation canals and ditch systems, man-made canals and pipes, as you can see from here, to install hydropower generators. To be clear, we are not talking about free-flowing rivers or streams. These are man-made structures that have already gone through environmental review. These canals, as you can see, do not contain endangered fish or wildlife. I worked very closely with the Irrigation and Electrical District Association of Arizona, the special districts, municipalities, Indian utility authorities, and project managers that are engaged in the management and delivery of water and power in my state, as Congressman Tipton and I crafted this legislation. I am proud to be from a state that is as innovative and as resourceful as Arizona. Our state is a leader in developing safe ways to tap into our natural resources, which provides much-needed energy and jobs. Unfortunately, due to federal constraints, Arizona is unable to fully tap its hydroelectric power generation potential because of the duplicative regulations that make it too expensive and burdensome to develop. It is simply the failure of the federal policies to facilitate an environment that is conducive to this type of development. Instead of working with communities that share common goals and values, the federal government is dictating to them. The experts on the ground in Arizona say that we are literally sitting on a hydropower gold mine waiting for the needed clarifications and streamlining that will cut costs and make this program more attractive. This bill does just that. For example, the Maricopa-Stanfield Irrigation and Drainage District, located in Pinal County, Arizona, estimates that it has the capacity to build 14 to 17 hydropower units if this legislation is signed into law. Those units could generate a total of approximately 2,200 kilowatts of renewable energy, which is enough electricity to power 550 to 1,000 homes. This is just one of the power managers in my state. Another district the Central Irrigation and Drainage District, centered in Eloy, Arizona, has indicated they could install 8 to 10 hydropower units with the capacity of 1,200 to 1,500 kilowatts of renewable energy, another 500 or so homes. These economic impacts are not small for these rural communities. They would provide a real economic boost and will reduce consumer energy cost. There is not one solution to our nation's energy crisis, but hydropower is clearly part of an overall all options on the table solution. Hydropower is the highest source of non-carbon emitting energy in the world. It accounts for approximately 70% of the United States' total renewable electricity generation, and we are not even tapping the potential. Investing in hydropower infrastructure will strengthen our economy and help move us toward energy independence. To top it off, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that our bill will generate $5 million in federal revenue over the next 10 years. Increased revenues from the sale of this renewable energy can result in a new source of funding for operating, maintaining, and rehabilitating our aging water delivery infrastructure at lower costs to farmers. This legislation is truly a win-win for the American people and is exactly the type of legislation this House should be passing. Vote yes on this bill. The Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act of 2012. It will create jobs in rural America, increase U.S. energy independence, and raise revenue for the U.S. Treasury. So I guess the opponents of this bill are right. If common sense solutions are your cup of tea, then I guess I can't help myself. And this is let me repeat myself and this fact, this renewable energy is at no cost